Hey class, welcome to Res 11, Methods of Research, and we are still here at Unit 2, writing the Chapter 1 of your proposal. In this video, we will talk about the scope and the limitations of the study. Why do we write this in Chapter 1? What's the importance of this part? And how do we write this part? This is actually 1.6 of our Chapter 1, the scope and the limitations of the study. We see two important terms in this part, your scope and your delimitation. And the scope of the study explains the extent to which the area will be explored in the study. And it specifies the parameters within which the study will be operating. So for the scope, we have the key terms, extent, and parameters. For the delimitations, these are the characteristics that limit the scope and describe the boundaries of the study, such as how big only will your sample size be, where will the samples be collected, or the location in which the survey will take place, the population traits, etc. So in short, this scope and the limitations of your proposal tells your readers what is included and what is excluded in your research. So in the sample proposal given to you, this is an example of the scope and the limitations of their study. So in the first paragraph, you will see the scope. It only focus on the antibacterial effect of pako and kabuyaw against Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Klebsiella pneumoniae. You will see that this is their scope in terms of objective. And they stated here that young healthy leaves and stem of pako together with the matured leaves of kabuyaw will undergo qualitative phytochemical analysis to determine the medicinal substances of these plants. This part here talks about the scope in terms of their methodology. Also, the second paragraph shows the scope in terms of methodology. The third paragraph shows the scope in terms of the locale where they collected their samples, the bacteria used, and where they got their bacteria, and the protocols that they use. So, in short, their scope and the limitations of the study look into the objectives and their methodology. Methodology in terms of what are included, what parts are included, where did they collect this, what will be the protocols used, and where they took where they obtained the bacteria that they will be using. So frequently asked question at this part, is there a difference between delimitation and limitation? Delimitations are those elements that the researcher can control. The limitations are those characteristics selected by the researcher to define the boundaries of the study. Remember the key term again, the boundaries of the study. And these delimitations aim to narrow the scope of the study. So it could be as big as the whole plant itself, but they want to delimit it only using leaves and stems, for example. So the researcher makes conscious exclusionary and inclusionary decisions regarding the sample, including such information as geographic location. For example, they want to determine the knowledge, attitude, and practices of mothers towards vaccination in Cagayan. But they want to delimit it in certain barangays only in Cagayan. So they can also make conscious exclusionary and inclusionary decisions regarding the sample, the variables studied, the theoretical perspectives, the instruments that they will be using, and the generalizability. For example, in the chapter 1, this will be also talked about in chapter 2 under your review of related literature. So example here is that the study will interview key respondents. So, limitation, on the other hand, or limitations are those conditions beyond the control of the researcher. And it may take place, or it may place restrictions on the conclusions of the study and their application to other situations. So this is the things that cannot be controlled by the researcher. And because it cannot be controlled, we cannot conclude it in a more general term. So these are those that you cannot do, and are the potential weaknesses of the study, such as influences or confounders that may affect the study, shortcomings or conditions that the researcher cannot control. So we will see this and can highlight in chapter 4. So example is the key respondents are quarantined due to exposure to a COVID positive office mate. So you cannot interview the key respondents because they are quarantined. So another example is that administrative policies that preclude using more than one class in an experiment. So a data gathering instrument that has not been validated, or the inability to randomly select and assign subjects to experimental or control groups. So I hope that is clear, the difference between the limitation and your limitation. Why is the scope and the limitation of the study important? So only mothers are included in the study, for example. That's your delimitation, because you always have to follow it up with because. So scope and the limitation of a study, there are two elements of a research paper that inform the reader what information is included in the research, and you need to explain why the author chose that information. Why did you choose only that? Why did you delimit only with that respondent, for example, or with that locale? Although scope and delimitation explain the way a study is limited, this information adds credibility to research. Actually, this is the part where you always tell your panel that that's only the scope and the limitation of the study. When you ask you, why is it not included? Why did you not include this, that, and that? You can always back it up with, that's only the scope and the limitation of the study. So at this part, I will ask the first 5 students who will first post a meme that is related to the scope and the limitations of the study part of the research at our group chat will get additional 2 points for activity 2.6. Again, the first 5 students who first post a meme that is related to the scope and the limitations of the study part of the research at our group chat will get additional 2 points for activity 2.6. So the meme can be the same as my example here with Doc Ju and Chris. So next is, how do we write this part? First is, write the scope of the study. So a good scope statement will answer the following 6 questions. We have why, what, where, when, who, and how. For why, this is the general aims and objectives or the purpose of the research. For what, this is the subject to be investigated and the included variables. For where, this is the location or setting of the study, for example, where the data will be gathered or to which the entity the data will belong. For when, this is the time frame within which the data is to be collected. For who, this is the subject matter of the study and the population from which they will be selected. And these populations needs to be large enough to be able to make generalizations, especially for those who will do quantitative researches. And for how, this is how the research is to be conducted, including description of the research design, for example, whether it is an experimental research, a qualitative research, or a case study. It could also include description of methodology, the research tools, and analysis techniques. Downloaded this research tool called Rep and Write. You can also download it. It gives you like a phrase banks where they will give you prompts on how you will start um, your statements. For example, here, the scope and remit of work or the limitation. So you can start your sentences with the study will focus on, the scope of the study will be, this will cover, this study will cover, the study will consist of, and the study aims to. So you can have also here when you will write your introduction, you can get phrases there. When you write also your materials and methods, it can all they could have also prompts or phrase banks that you can use here. These are other phrase banks for your scope and the limitation of the study. For example, in this work, our main interest lies with or within the scope of this research, we are only interested in, or at this stage in the discussion, this might not seem to be particularly relevant to, or this topic is outside the scope of our study. So I included this in this PowerPoint video so you can pause and actually look at the sentences or prompt phrases that you can use for your scope and the limitations. So for the second step, we need to write the limitations of the study. So the first step is writing the scope of the study. The second part is writing the delimitations of the study. Since the delimitation parameters are within the researcher's control, readers need to know why they were set. You need to give them why they are set. Why did you choose only that parameter? Why only mothers, for example? Why only select barangays in Tuguegarao City? So you need to give them a rationale why they were set and what alternative options were available and why these alternatives were rejected. Why did you not cover the whole of Tuguegarao City? Or why did you not choose the whole plant? For example, if you are collecting data that can be derived from 3 different but similar experiments, the reader needs to understand how and why you decided to select the one you have. Your reasons should always be linked back to your research question, as all your delimitations should result from trying to make your study more relevant to your scope. So therefore, the scope and the limitations are usually considered together when writing a paper. So you don't only say that I delimited or we delimited that parameter to only this and not state because or not specify why you only chose that parameter. So again, these are prompts under the limitations of the study. This study does not cover blah, blah, blah. The study is limited to. This study is confined to, but you need to state also why. After stating why you only chose that parameter. So the limitations refer to those characteristics that limit the scope and define the conceptual boundaries of your study. Again, the keyword boundary. So this is determined by the conscious exclusionary and inclusionary decisions you make about how to investigate the research problem. So for example, these are examples of your inclusion and exclusion criteria that we need to see in your scope and the limitations of the study in terms of participants or your respondents, in terms of the variables, in terms of instruments used, and in terms of generalizability. So for example, for participants, participation in this study is delimited to teachers who teach third grade in a private school in the state of California, and have taught more than 5 years. Exclusion, for this given inclusion also, teachers who meet all other qualifications but have previously taught in a public school environment will be excluded from the study. Then you can also state here after why you included and why you excluded these participants. For variables, an example is the study will be delimited to examination of teachers' self-efficacy when teaching mathematics only, and exclusion, teachers' self-efficacy in other subject areas will not be considered. For instrumentation, example for inclusion, self-efficacy will be measured on a Likert type scale with an instrument designed specifically for the proposed study or researcher made, maybe because there's no standard for the self-efficacy for the given study. Exclusion, only those questions that are approved by an expert panel will be included in the survey instrument. And further, retest reliability analysis will be used to determine which questions on the self-efficacy instrument will be utilized in the final document. For the generalizability, the results of the proposed study will be generalizable to teachers who, as you can see, all those be included in the inclusion of the participants. And for the exclusion, the results of the proposed study will not be generalizable to teachers who have previously taught in a public school environment. Same as your exclusion for the participants. A frequently asked question is, how long should this part be, or how long should the scope and the limitation be? So this could be as little as 1 to 2 paragraphs, but this is a very important part of your chapter 1 because it will tell you the extent and the boundaries of your study. So third step on writing your scope and delimitation is to combine and rewrite. So remember, the first step is write the scope of the study, and the second step is write the delimitations of the study. So your reasons should always be linked back to your research question, as all the limitations should result from trying to make your study more relevant to your scope. So these are related. So therefore, the scope and the limitations, as I've stated a while back, are usually considered together when writing a paper. So this is an example of our recently concluded study with DOH. So given here, so first paragraph is the objectives, scope, and the limitation in terms of objective. The principal purpose of the study is to evaluate. And then here you will see the limitations in terms of the respondents. So from list of identified GIDA IP barangays of Cagayan province. And then the scope and the limitations in terms of your protocols, be involving questionnaires, key informant interviews, and focus group discussions, and also your when. So you will see here your why, what, where, when, who, and how. And here you will see again, second paragraph is the scope and the limitation in terms of your methods, protocols. And then this part here shows you the limitations, your inclusion and exclusion criteria for the study. So the third part is you combine and rewrite. So you cannot put them separately. You need to combine your scope and the limitations. So for activity 2.6, which is of course a group work, you write your scope and the limitations. So disregard this part, the objectives and the methods. For the scope, you already know that your why, when, where, how, and what. And for your delimitations, your delimited parameters, and because you need to give the reason why you delimited that part. And don't forget your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So in summary, in this PowerPoint video, we talk about the scope and the limitations of the study and how do we write this part. So that's it for your scope and the limitations. Thanks for watching.